All right, welcome to Catholic in America. So good to have you all here on this beautiful Monday morning, November 9th. We're going live right now on our Facebook page and our other pages as well. So it's our first time doing that, so I apologize for any technical difficulties. We're going to be back in the studio for Catholic in America very soon, our recently rebuilt studio. And so we are excited about that. And I'm also very excited today to be joined by two of my good friends, my brothers in Christ, two fellow priests of the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee, Father Dustin Feddon and Father Doug Martin. Father Dustin is the pastor, or the administrator, shoot, I want to make you the pastor of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And he also heads up Joseph House in Tallahassee. And Father Doug Martin is probably the most recently ordained, in this group at least, as a Catholic priest, but as an associate pastor at St. Mary's in Fort Walton Beach. Welcome, guys.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Father Mike.
Excellent. So, guys, I'll start with you, Father Doug. Has anything big happened recently in the country that maybe people have been asking you about, or upset about, or frustrated more than usual, besides coronavirus and besides economy and things like that? Anything at all?
Yeah, I guess Florida State got beat on. No, Clemson lost. Wait, no, not that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's what everybody's talking about since last Tuesday and over the weekend. It's really the presidency, and it's really got a lot of people upset. There's one group that's extremely ecstatic, excited, out in the streets partying, and can't blame them much. If they put a lot into the election and their guy, the guy that they wanted to win, won, then I think they should be celebrating. The other side just is devastated and seems unusually devastated. And I think there's some of it because this has been built up to be really one for the ages. Like one of the, if I heard it once, I heard it probably 20 times. This is the most important presidential election of our lifetimes. And so I think when you build it up that way, you set yourself up for one side to be extremely disappointed. And that's really what we're seeing. I'm seeing it locally and on, Twitter, on Facebook, those sorts of things.
Absolutely. So Father Dustin, how are you seeing that then? I'm assuming you're seeing the same sort of reactions from people, and just the strength of that reaction, anger, frustration, fear, a lot of those things. We're going to talk about Joe Biden and the fact that he is a professing Catholic. We are going to talk about that today and spend some time there as well. But just for this election itself, how is that, do you think, affecting people, maybe even their faith during this time?
Yeah, well, I've seen this for a while now, Father Mike, and where over the past couple of years, hearing it from a lot of parishioners that actually talk to me about the kind of despair that they feel just being caught up in the news. And it's like every day is another crisis, another, cycle of grief and mourning and joy and devastation. And so and certainly this year, now that we have so many of our parishioners, so many of our family members that are at home, watching television, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. And it just seems to me that lead up, that build up of the kind of almost hysteria of what is happening in the world as it comes to us via the media has really ramped this up. And so, we're still in the midst of the story, right? I mean, there's, President Trump has not conceded. So
Right.
the drama of the election is still being felt. So I've seen it, but I feel as in a way I've been seeing it now for years, and it certainly is increasing, and that's troubling.
Right. And of course, we don't claim to have any sort of clairvoyant understanding of things. There still is, Biden has been declared the winner by most news outlets and things, but obviously there's legal battles that will still rage. Some people that are very passionate about that. The possibility of votes not being counted or votes being counted after the fact, and so recognizing that, but for all intents and purposes, we can only respond to the information that's in front of us right now. That Joe Biden is the president-elect for the United States, and that reality, I think, is interesting on a lot of levels, and we can talk about some of the concerns and the frustrations and some of the things with our understanding as Catholics of the dignity of human life and religious freedoms and other things as well. But in the history of the United States, there's a strong and virulent history of anti-Catholicism. So the fact that as the U.S. bishops tweeted out that Joe Biden, they said it very carefully, is the second professing Catholic man who professes Catholicism to be elected president of the United States. Kind of, in a sense, congratulating him and celebrating that. I think there's a measured celebration to that. But how does that, in light of the fact that we have faced a long history of anti-Catholicism, where does this fall into that the response that people have had and how Joe Biden talks about his Catholic faith all the time?
I've been very surprised that even though he's mentioned it on several occasions, you haven't really seen people come after him about his Catholic faith. And it makes you wonder, why not him? I mean, we did hear it some in the confirmation hearings for Amy Coney Barrett as she was going through. We heard her Catholicism brought up, and as a matter of fact, it at times attacked. And yet, when Joe Biden, when President-elect Joe Biden has mentioned him being Catholic and been forthright about being Catholic, even quoting encyclicals and quoting music that's sang in the Mass and those sorts of things. He did just the other night.
We don't have the copyright. We don't have the copyright for On Eagle's Wings. They'll come after us too hard. That On Eagle's Wings crowd. So we won't sing it, but it's a Catholic song that you've probably heard if you've been to a Catholic church.
It is, and that he mentioned those things and said those things, and really there hasn't been reaction either way from most people. There may be a reaction from Catholics who question how Catholic he is, or whether he's Catholic enough, or whether he's Catholic at all. But as far as the people that were responding to Amy Coney Barrett's Catholicism, you've heard nothing at all in way of criticism or in way of excitement. And so I find that very interesting that either way, there's been nothing that's really said.
Yeah. What do you think, Father Dustin?
Yeah, that's right. Father Mike, I mean, to what extent it's attributed to how far we've come in terms of whereas with Kennedy, had to almost convince people that he, was Catholic in name only.
Right.
But in this situation, it seems to me, the way I read it, you kind of have some of the media that see no problem with his Catholicism, perhaps because where he's Catholic or where he expresses his Catholicism, it's an aspect of Catholicism that they're more comfortable with or aligned with. And then on the other hand, there are, let's just say, those on the right that doubt his Catholicism because, his issues are not their issues. So to me, it kind of reinforces how polarized, not only culture is, but even our Catholic culture is. It just depends on what issues they fall, that they align with, that whether or not one will accept them and their Catholicism.
Yeah, I feel like we're on the national conversation, and I'm sure we're getting lots of reactions to that from people. And again, thank you for those that are watching and tuning in and commenting. But the response that a lot of people have, it seems, is basically consistent with JFK's response. So JFK, John F. Kennedy, when he was seeking election, he had to go down to the South, I think into Houston, in front of a group of 300 Southern Protestant pastors, and convince them that his Catholic faith would have nothing to do with his policies. And basically that line of demarcation that continues to this day for many Catholic politicians, that they'll say things like this: I'm personally opposed to whatever grave evil or injustice it might be. Usually abortion is the hot button issue. The church and the bishops call it the preeminent issue of our time as Catholics in the United States. And say I'm personally opposed to this, but my policy goes the other direction. That really, I don't want to say started with JFK, but he overcame a lot of the suspicions against Catholics by doing that. And in a sense, we kind of reap what we sow. I think Father Doug, off air, you were talking about this, that we have not done a good job of forming Catholics to live their faith consistently. And it's difficult in this world. It's difficult to have a consistent ethic of life. It's difficult to form, while holding and maintaining those preeminent issues, because abortion is a preeminent issue, not because unborn babies' lives are more important than prisoners' lives or immigrants' lives. It's preeminent because that's the one issue that's where it's the authorized, legal, and unfettered direct killing of an innocent human person. All of the other issues have gradations of that, the death penalty being the other one. However, there are legal recourses within the death penalty, and Father Dustin can talk a lot more to that. So it's not preeminent in that babies' lives matter and other people's lives don't. Is that's a clear and direct threat against those persons' lives. But it's interesting that I feel, done such a poor job of teaching and embodying a different culture within, because Catholics, we're the largest population of any denomination in the United States. And so have we done a good job of teaching this consistent ethic of life, where it's not just that I'm a Republican and then I take all the Catholic stuff on with that, and any of the stuff that challenges me as a Catholic I kind of set to the side, or a Democrat, which we're seeing that very extreme now, where huge aspects of the Catholic faith are being left to the side because I'm a Democrat first and foremost. And I think that's where we need to really search ourselves and our hearts, and just the discourse that's been going on. Has it been effective? Have we been sharing the faith? If Joe Biden's someone that's been going to Mass every single Sunday, and for all intents and purposes it seems like he does since he was a kid, and this whole aspect of his faith needs to inform his actions. He can't sin against his conscience by being in favor of, not just in favor of, but actively supporting something like abortion. I think that's something that went wrong in his pastoring and his outreach to him.
I agree. I mean, I think that is the issue is, and it's something that the church is really picking back up today. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, it's always been an emphasis of the church, but I think you're seeing it more and more so now, which is, the conversion of the heart of our people. And we see some of the ramifications of a cultural Catholicism that is, pay, pray, and obey, the kind that we tell you what you believe and you don't think about it. That when you put it into a society where people are thinking about it, and where we're asking people to form their conscience, to ask those tough questions, and especially when we're saying as Catholics that, God's big enough to take those questions, but it seems like maybe, we haven't given them either the tools to do that, or we haven't informed them enough to be able to ask those questions from a truly formed conscience, to be able to see those things, especially from a Catholic, what we would consider a Christian point of view. I think that a lot of the failure that we see with what's happening with Joe Biden and his Catholicism happened for years in his catechesis, in the way he was taught, the way he was formed, the way he was trained. But, not just that, but to think with the heart of Jesus, to think with the mind of Jesus, it's a very difficult thing if you're not taught it, if you don't know it, if you haven't been exposed to it enough, and all you've been exposed to is rote prayers and not a lot of thinking of it. You've got the answers to the questions, but you don't know the theory behind it. I think that's where some of our issues are coming in with Joe Biden and other Catholics who are in politics that are not expressing Catholic views that we understand to be the teaching of the church, the teaching of Scripture, and the teaching of tradition.
Well, and I think a lot of this raises, what you said earlier, Father Mike, that there is a difficulty in, we believe in, the church teachings, and we hold these principles, but we can't conflate principles with applications.
Right.
How do we take these principles of the dignity of life and apply them into a utterly secular, realm where we're not a theocracy, where we have to make compromises? God bless those who take on the vocation in politics because of, both right and left, Republican and Democrat, and what they have to grapple with. And I'll have to say, I think that there are aspects of Joe Biden's life that probably has been formed in a positive way by his faith. Right. A public servant, and I know we tend to be cynical about politicians and think that they're all just, taking it all to the bank and living off of, the fruits of all of our labors in this realm, the elites. But I mean, this is someone who did choose to become a public defender and represent, poor minorities, and who has made choices, I think, to serve the common good. And from everything that I've read about Joe Biden, is he's not a firebrand. He's not a radical socialist. He seems to be someone who actually does try to build bridges in among both Republicans and Democrats. So I think that I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't read his biographies or his autobiographies, but I'm not sure that we can't say that there have been positive elements in which he has a conscience that has been formed by the Eucharist, by daily to weekly receiving of the Eucharist, and through the social doctrine of the church. Now, are there issues and areas where perhaps it could be better formed? Absolutely.
Right.
I would say the same for other devout Catholics like Rick Santorum and others who have served for the common good and who has tried to express their faith in a positive way, but yet perhaps in certain issues could be better formed. So I think it's, there's a lot of issues, and certainly we'll talk more, I'm sure, about the preeminent issue of abortion and of the dignity of human life, and then how that plays out and applying it within the social secular sphere.
And I think that's the difficulty too, that all of us have seen. And again, even as we say this, people will hear one line that's said, and reject everything out of hand because we're not. Thank you to everyone who is watching and maybe heard something that they didn't like and continues to watch, because I think that's a miracle nowadays, for that to ever happen. But recognizing the fact that to allow ourselves to be challenged, allow ourselves to not be comfortable, particularly when it comes to political parties, neither of which perfectly represents the Catholic Church. Recognizing too that there are deep and important issues that are at stake here. So the passion behind politics is not unwarranted. It's there for a reason. But in a certain sense, when we experience someone who disagrees with us, even on very important issues, particularly or definitely with the election of candidates, and we forget that we're called to love, especially them, then I think we've lost. I've been saying this to my parish, my wonderful parishioners here, that we can be right on every single issue, and we can still go to hell. And I think that's something that probably just recognizing that fact, that we are called to not just be right on the issues, but we're called to actually love people, especially those that disagree with us. And that's a difficult thing to do. That's the work of grace. That's where all of a sudden politics and all this stuff and Twitter and online life and social media and that crazy show that a mirage that all that is, that needs to be wedded to and informed by our faith, which calls us especially to love those that we disagree with and to pray for those that are in positions of authority as well. With that too, I just kind of going back a little bit with the. I have a really big comment that just came in with the kind of the history of this too, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of that. And Father Dustin, I know you love history, and Father Doug weigh in on this as well. That this comfort with allowing our faith to, particularly when it's challenging to the narrative, challenging to the status quo, to be kind of kept under wraps. Like where does that come from? Be so secretive about our faith. To me, it's connected as Catholics in this country with we don't use a lot of times Catholics don't evangelize. We don't tell people about our faith or invite people to church. Is there historical precedent for that? Is that something that's new that we're just facing nowadays, or is that something that's kind of been baked into the cake for Catholics living in the United States?
Well, I think, certainly, if you think back to the early mid-20th century, and the suspicion, and this was a real suspicion by a large number of Protestants in particular, that there was an effort by the Holy Roman Empire, by the Vatican, to convert America to Catholicism, whatever that would mean, right? Obviously there's no secret archives that was an actual strategy by, our beloved popes of the early mid-20th century, but there was this fear that somehow America would become a Catholic nation,
right,
like in the medieval era. So, and there was, and we also know that Catholics were encouraged by the church not to vote prior to the Second Vatican Council. So there was this kind of confliction with both Protestants in America, with Catholics involved in the public sphere and in culture and in, certainly in Congress or in politics. And then on the other hand, there was a lot of suspicion among Catholics about participating
Right.
in the public sphere. So I think the history was informative for both sides. This concern about how to practice their faith, in the secular sphere and out in public and being open about it. Right? They could go to mass, pray, pray at mass, and have all of their festivities and everything within the conclave of of the church within their local parish, but going out was something very different.
Absolutely.
So I think that there was a conflict both among Protestants suspicious of Catholics, but also Catholics concerned about how to practice their faith in a largely Protestant and secular culture.
Particularly, I think, 18th, 19th, and even into the 20th century, that the such 19th and 20th, most Catholics in this country that were coming into large numbers of Catholics were immigrants. In a sense, there was already kind of like two strikes against them. So how do we fit in? How do we fit in with this culture around us? And part of that is learning how to make your faith almost completely private. Private devotional life. Which, obviously our faith should be personal, or your faith, you should have a personal relationship with the Lord and a personal prayer life. But this privatization of faith where it can't spill over into the public sphere. But for actually, all three of us are all converts to the faith. I converted when I was young, but for you, Father Doug, who were a minister in another denomination and ended up becoming Catholic, that you chose this mess, right? You chose this Catholic thing, and we'll talk more about that in the future. But was this something that you kind of from the outside looking in the Catholic Church, that you saw the way that Catholics approach politics maybe as being different, or maybe just being consistent with kind of the culture around them?
Well, two things. One is that there was this fear. I do remember my father speaking about this, and I do remember reading it. There was this fear that that JFK was going to be an agent of the Vatican itself. And so if he were to be elected, some of the fears that Father Dustin's been talking about of this becoming a Catholic country or a Catholic empire was there. And for some crazy reason it was there, but it was there. And so that's the reason why JFK had to go to Dallas and kind of quell some of those fears, and so much so that he had to say, I'm away from it. But as a Protestant growing up, and specifically as I started getting into politics and think about those sorts of things, I had an admiration for Catholics who are in politics. The one thing that you saw with Catholics that you didn't necessarily see with the Protestant denominations, especially some of the ones that were more, well, not as academically inclined, and I don't mean that as a slight at all, but just the history of them weren't as academically as inclined as Catholicism itself was. As you saw this kind of this willingness to reach and to go into academics, to go into the other disciplines, and to take those things on, and to allow their faith to permeate those things in such a way as that they could use. Well, I mean, one of the things that we know from Catholicism, and one thing that I learned after becoming Catholic, was the idea of natural law and the idea of metaphysics, and using those things to inform every aspect of your life. And so I had quite an admiration for Catholics who were in politics, just mainly because they would always go so high. I mean, you look at how many Catholics, just for instance, has been on the Supreme Court. I mean, it's amazing how many Catholics have been on the Supreme Court, and you really don't see that coming from any other religious group or background for the most part, especially from a particular one. So when I saw Catholics being involved in politics, it was usually in two different ways. One, it was the admiration that I had for all the lawyers and all the ones who were, the politicians who were Catholic who were involved, and how well thought out they were. But it was also for the way that you really didn't hear it locally. You didn't hear or see that on a local level at all. And like you said, I mean, I think it was hard to get Catholics to really speak about how they interacted. And it was almost as if, and this was kind of what I was describing earlier, it was almost as if there were two different things. Your politics and your religion really weren't supposed to meet. They're supposed to be the separation of church and state. And so it was almost easier for there to be this separation simply because Catholics were so personal and private about their faith and were unwilling to speak in the public, in the public settings. And so I think it became that way. It became almost as if when I would view Catholics, you almost saw a certain type of secularism that was there, but only because they didn't use religious language to speak about the very principles that they were voting for, or that they were fighting for.
Yeah, that a Catholic would be less likely to bust out in a rosary, before you started a basketball game or something like that. So
Right.
for you, Father Dustin, also a convert as well. Let's go converts. We're 3 for 3 as far as convert priests on this Catholic in America show. Was that something that you studied before you became Catholic, or have continued to? Because the Church's social teachings, which is basically how we interact in the social sphere out in the world, how we apply the gospel to politics, to economics, to all these areas. It's not proscriptive, but it really is informative and is a great foundation to set our society on. What was kind of your perspective of entering into the Catholic Church, or seeing that from the outside, and now being ordained in the Catholic Church?
Yeah, well, my journey into the church was, in large part, did begin when I was pursuing graduate studies in religion, and I ended up teaching a class on religious ethics. And one of the texts that we had for the course was let's see, Veritatis Splendor, Pope John Paul II's encyclical, and then I started reading other encyclicals, and then just began to see the depth of the Church's awareness of not only philosophy and metaphysics, but also the realities of the secular world, and understanding the relationship between doctrine, doctrine, church teachings, and the realities of the needs of our world. And so I went kind of from reading Pope John Paul II's encyclicals into then reading the Second Vatican Council documents. And then I read this book, and I'll just kind of give a quick kind of shout out to it, or a recommendation for anyone that has maybe a few weeks to read Paul Ellie's book, The Life You Save May Be Your Own. And it's a book about Dorothy Day, Flannery O'Connor, Walker Percy, and Thomas Merton, American Catholics, and in the 20th century. And I think 3 of them, right, being converts themselves. But what was wonderful about this book is it shows the way in which a distinctly American culture, an ethos of living in a democracy, shaped their spirituality and their vocations in very different ways, in different directions, and certainly the differences among them, aesthetically, and certainly in their vocations as well. But how there was this common kind of American Catholic identity. And, so often I read about Catholics that lived in Spain and Italy, and in Brazil, and the lives of the saints. But then to actually reflect on Catholicism in America, it brought it closer to me, I think, in a lot of ways. And I was actually able to say, you know what? I share just a tad of Thomas Merton's culture. A little bit of Dorothy Day's kind of culture has been my culture as well. And so The Life You Save May Be Your Own is a good book, and just kind of chronicling the story of Catholicism in America lived out by these four great Catholics.
I love that too, particularly in different areas of the country. The Southern culture, and someone like Walker Percy or Flannery O'Connor, how do you live your Catholic faith there? And other areas of the country as well. Dorothy Day up in New York. So I want to break this down here. So in a minute, we'll give each of us a minute for this. Okay. So if someone came to you and was saying that they were a strong Biden supporter, they're a Catholic, their response right now, how should they, what should their response as a follower of Jesus Christ? Hopefully that's first and foremost, more than other things. But so someone who's excited about this election, we'll start there. Then we'll go to people. There might be some people that are watching right now that are very unexcited or angry about this election. We'll get to you. Let's start there. So Father Doug, in 60 seconds or less, what would you tell someone who is excited about this election, voted for Biden, has the bumper sticker, and wants 100 high fives from you?
I mean, certainly be thankful and be happy that your candidate won, and to hope and pray that your candidate will do what's best for our country, that will bring about unity, will bring about those things that were important to you and to your party, but would do so in hopefully in a unifying way, and willing to reach across the aisle, willing to work with each other, but to be humble in your win, even if in the past others haven't been humble when their candidates won, but for you to be humble in your win, and to be, congenial and understanding of those who've lost, because there's some who've lost that they think they've lost everything. Right. And so for you to be a humble winner, someone who loves, and finally to continue to pray, that the praying didn't just end on November 3rd or November 7th, but that to continue to pray for our country and to pray for Biden, that he will be a successful president, because for all of us, we really need him to be a successful president.
Absolutely. Okay. 60 seconds, Father Dustin.
Yeah, absolutely. I just echo what Father Doug said. Begin with praying, especially in this time of so much polarization, division. Pray that President-elect Joe Biden can in fact be a bridge builder, that he can in fact work for the common good, which is a core mission of the church at this time, I think, in terms of, at least in our country. But I think also it's always good for whichever person was your guy, in this case, at the presidential level, is to reflect, well, okay, to be honest, in what areas do we want to see growth? Do we want to see areas of the other aspects of the Catholic social teachings to bear fruit, and to pray in those areas as well? So I think there's probably a lot of things that they can be excited about and to be happy about, and to be praying for President-elect, and then to be honest too and say, well, what areas would we like to see more attention given in the coming months and years?
I think it's a great answer too, and I would say with that. That obviously, I mean, not obviously, but what the church teaches, particularly, for intrinsic moral evils like abortion, that while there's all sorts of mitigating circumstances that someone might decide to vote for that person in spite of that if they voted for the person because of that, then that really is cooperating with sin, and that's something that does need to be repented of. Now, having that conversation, for different people who are at different places. But I think too, just to build off of what you said, Father Dustin, that it's are we willing to challenge our guy? And I think that's always something, definitely during Trump's time in office, or Obama, or one of the Bushes, or anybody else. Now, as it looks like, we're not calling this here at Catholic in America, but as it looks like with Biden as president, are we willing to, even if we supported him, to challenge him when he's wrong and to call that out? Or is there such a fear that it's going to be used against us that will cover over any mistake? And you always see this in the other guy, in the other guy's camp. But so that ability, so I would say praying for him, being able to, if there's an endless justice in your own heart for the reason that you voted for him, to repent of that, because we're called to change in our hearts, especially towards defenseless human life, to be supporters of that and defenders of that. But then also, am I willing to be a prophetic voice? If you're in the Democratic Party, are you willing to be a prophetic voice within the Democratic Party? Okay, so we'll flip it up for this one now, and just a minute on each, and we'll go to you first. first, Father Dustin. If you have a person who's coming to you, Father, the world's falling apart. I'm so angry. I'm upset. You didn't do enough. The bishops didn't do enough. There's all sorts of things of that. We don't need to get into what the bishops could have or couldn't have done, or what priests should or shouldn't have done. But maybe just anger, sadness, despair, because if they're Trump supporters, then their guy has lost. What's your response to them? 60 seconds or less for them as a pastor. They're just walking through the parking lot, so you only got a little bit of time.
Right. Well, yeah, and and this is in other areas as well of life. I think the challenge in a cynical age is to discover the good in the other, and we've so vilified everyone, and our culture has done a great job of that. But to discover the good in this case, in President-elect Joe Biden, to be able to see what qualities there do represents for you the mission of the church in its outreach to the poor, to the disenfranchised, issues related to healthcare. There's so many other things that we could say. Look, if I'm formed by my conscience, and this is not my person, this is not the person I supported or voted. What good can I find in them? And I know people on the other side that had that challenge 4 years ago.
Right.
And that was a challenge for them. But I think in our age, the great crisis for us is to be able to discover the good in others in an age in which everyone wants to villainize our opponents.
Absolutely. That's a tough challenge. That's a tough challenge. Especially when we want just like this or this, just give it to you. Father Doug, you have 59 and a half seconds.
Yeah. I mean, and to follow up on what Father Dustin was saying, to seek that good in them, and to try and build those bridges to work on the things that you can commonly work on. I think that's one of the things we've seen that has not happened in the last, well, maybe forever, but at least in the last little bit, it doesn't seem like it. But what I would say to them is to pray, to continue to pray for yourself, and to begin to pray for the best, for success for President-elect Biden. And by success, you don't mean his success or the success of the Democratic Party, but the success of our nation through his presidency, because we're counting on that. We're dependent upon that if he is the president. And so to look for the best in them, but to also to seek to find ways that we can work with him, or we can work with that side, however you want to put it. And I love what you said, Father Dustin, to not vilify, to begin to see each other as human beings again, and to love, and so to pray and to love and to seek ways that we can work with each other in a beautiful way, hopefully.
That's really it continues to be the challenge for us of living our Catholic faith. All the aspects of our faith, first and foremost, start with the fact that we're created by God, that God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, he's in charge. He's Lord. Jesus Christ is Lord. That's at the very center of our faith. Something I saw going around a lot, no matter who's president, Jesus is always king. And I think that's a good thing for us to be reminded of. And to recognize, too, that tendency that we sometimes have to make an idol out of something very good. Politics is a good thing. The political process in the United States especially is an amazing thing. The fact that we've seen, nearly seamless exchanges of power. We had, the Civil War and civil uprisings throughout our history, but we've had changes of power that have been largely peaceful, that there's still dialogue that does happen, that there is freedom of speech, though that's threatened. There's freedom of religion, though that's threatened. Is something amazing, but we can't make that into an idol. We can't make the United States of America into our idol, that we worship and make that everything. Because if we do, as soon as that gets challenged or shaken, then we resort to violence, or we resort to lashing out at people. So with this, I think we can all kind of comfortably say together, Father Dustin moved out of his frame there, that or wherever you are as a viewer of this, who's watching this, who's worried or who's elated over this political process, who's angry or who's sad or who's frustrated or just sick of the whole thing, to recognize that you can be a source of transformation in the world too. And I think that that's one of the beautiful things in our faith is that God's grace at work in us can transform us so that we become saints. That's what our country needs more than anything else. Men and women, young people that are transformed by the love of God and bring that out into the public sphere in their jobs, whether, priests or doctors or teachers or nurses or veterinarians or military personnel, police officers, or even politicians, that we're called to live our faith and to be bold with that and recognize that Jesus Christ is Lord, and because of that, our own inherent dignity as well, and that we can uphold the dignity of other people. So praying for the issues, obviously issues of war and peace, issues of justice in our society. Abortion, as we said, is that preeminent issue of life, but also marriage and family life and schools and education and economics. Coronavirus continues to be that sort of oppressive cloud over so much of this, that we can and should be interacting with those things, but the difference is going to be if we're going to be doing it with that well-formed mind, but also with a heart transformed by the love of God. So I want to just thank Father Doug Martin, Father Dustin Feddon, so much for joining me today in this conversation. I know we're wading into waters that can be controversial for some people, that people might find difficult, or you might be angry by something we said. Please respond to us in the comments. We will be responding to those things that come at us that are life-giving and hope-filled comments. If it's just anger at us, pray for us. We'll pray for you. We love you. But if you want to continue to support us on Patreon for St. Dominic Media Production Center, we thank you so much for your support. We're looking forward to being in the studio soon and very soon for another episode of Catholic in America. But in the meantime, please be praying for us as we're praying for you. God bless.